Today we are working on a 2005 Subaru Outback XT base model. We are replacing the wheel bearing housing, which is also the wheel hub, which means it is inclusive of all the studs and the entire assembly with the bearing. This Subaru type is a bolt-in type. There's no bearing press. There's none of that need to lube this bearing. This is all sealed, contained set, and pretty easy to install. So the first step is obviously getting your part. I've got a Duralast brand wheel hub right here. And before you do anything, you want to verify that this looks similar to the one that you have. It looks similar to the one that I've got here. 4 bolts on the back in a trapezoid pattern, 5 stud. So this was about $123 at Autozone. They sell a Moog one that I would have preferred to do for $199, but I did not have that kind of money to put into a wheel bearing at this time. The notice of needing a new wheel bearing came from the inspection by Schwab and the inclination that it was kind of making a whirring noise as I drove. I've had to replace a few wheel bearings in the past, so this was an inclination to me that I needed a wheel bearing. Schwab was just my confirmation to make sure I was right on with what I was trying to do. So the first step is going to be to remove your wheel. 5 wheel stud nuts, 19 millimeter. But let's run through what we've got out here first. Gloves. Always use some more heavy-duty gloves when doing suspension work. I know a lot of guys prefer the thin latex gloves. Those are great for being able to feel what you're doing, but I have many times hit the suspension or the wheel assembly or something under the car hard enough when trying to break things free that it goes right through those gloves, and I've got nice cuts in my hands. So I prefer padded gloves of some kind or a fully rubber enclosed glove if you need that extra grip. Tools that I am definitely going to use: a fairly bright silver Sharpie, 3/8 drive ratchet, half drive ratchet. I've got 2 of them out here because instead of using a 19 millimeter wrench, I'm just going to use 2 19 millimeter sockets and 2 half drive ratchets. I've got a half drive 3-inch extender, 3/8 drive 3-inch extender, some form of pliers or flathead or both. I've actually got myself a Leatherman right here that I use for most of this. It's pretty good at getting the little stuff that I need to without having to pull out more tools. Sockets, I've got a 10 mil 3/8 drive, 12 mil half drive, 14 mil half drive, 17 mil half drive, and 2 19 mil half drives, as well as the 32 mil half drive for breaking the axle nut free. And if you see that these 2 right here are black, these are impact rated, because for a lot of this I'm going to be using my impact wrench. This is a fairly heavy duty impact wrench and one of the largest ones they make in half drive. So this makes it much easier to get a lot of this stuff done, especially wheel studs, stuck bolts, all that, especially the suspension strut tower bolts. Those came off fairly easily with this guy. I've also got myself a magnetic tray for holding all of my loose material. These are really, really helpful, and I mean, they're like $10 at AutoZone. You can get the really big ones at Home Depot for like $15. Makes a big difference in being able to keep all your stuff together and not loose setting your bolts. Extra things I brought just in case: half drive 18-inch breaker bar, half drive 9-inch extension, 3/8 drive 9-inch extension. I am using a 6-ton bottle jack to jack up the car. I prefer bottle jacks on Subarus because I don't have to only use jack stand and release the jack. There's no hydraulic pressure loss from a bottle jack. But I've also got a jack stand as support backup in case the car wobbles off the bottle jack. So once you get the wheel off, you're going to come to the brake caliper, which the caliper is hanging up there. And it's got 2 14 millimeter bolts, one here, one here. You're going to crack those loose, get those bolts out. While the caliper is still sitting there, you're going to come at this 12 millimeter hold right here for your brake caliper hose. You're going to break that off. You're going to release that before you pull the caliper. You're going to pull the caliper, and you're going to want to bring it up here and hang it off of your strut tower. I've got it up there with a zip tie. You can use a bungee cord, pretty much anything you want to use to hold this up. Don't let this hang by the brake hose itself. It stretches and deteriorates the rubber. Next step is going to be coming to the back here. There's your ABS wheel speed sensor. It's got a 10 millimeter bolt in it. You're going to get that out fairly easy, and this is where the pliers or flathead come in because this guy gets stuck pretty easily. So So once you get that out, you're going to pull this out. You can just leave that to hang. If you need to, tuck it up in a way so it doesn't get in the way of getting hit by other things. You don't want the wire to get bent or the sensor itself to get damaged. And then you're going to come to the strut support bolts. You've got one here and one here, both 19 millimeter, held on the top one by washer and nut, and the lower one just by nut. Remember that this washer is on the nut side of this upper bolt because this is your camber bolt. Before you take this bolt out or do anything with it, you're going to need to mark the bolt against the strut tower because this acts as the camber control for your wheel. And if you want to avoid having to do an alignment after this, even though you should have it inspected anyways, this will make it easier to get it lined up where it's going. So there are the marks. You only have to make one to make that alignment. I prefer to make two, just in case I kind of fucked up on the first one, make it a little easier to see. So I usually mark it out with two. And then once you get that broken loose, comes right out, and you can see this bolt is oblong. There's not a perfect circle, and that's how the cambering works for controlling your camber in and out. So we're going to take that, its nut and its washer, toss them in our magnetic tray. And then once you get the bottom one out, your strut tower has some play. You can do those first. I usually do those first to make sure I'm going to be able to get them out and that I don't have to get some degreaser or some PB blaster to get them out. Usually I would leave them in at this point, but broken loose. And you're going to come to your axle nut, your 32 millimeter. This is where the impact wrench makes a big difference because you can just pop that guy on here and bust it free. If not, you're going to want to get at least a breaker bar. In this instance, I would prefer my 24-inch breaker bar and pipe to break this guy loose. One of the things you can do to make it easier is you'll see that this is notched. It'll be notched into the axle. Try not to damage the notch in the axle when you take this out because you can use a flathead to pry it out or some pliers and it'll make it easier to come off. Again, if you use an impact wrench, it'll come off without having to do any of that fairly easily. And then that guy will come free. You're not supposed to reuse these, but I prefer not to be dropping, was it about $5 to $7 per nut every time I have to do this. I will end up reusing this, mainly because I don't really care. Set that guy there. Now your axle may be stuck a little bit when you get your two bolts out of the top. You've got your brake caliper off, you've got your wheel speed sensor off. This guy will just come free. You're going to want to rotate the wheels in the direction of the side that is not being worked on. So I've got the wheel cranked all the way over to the left, and this makes it so I avoid having to take out the tie rod, which I think is a waste of time to do, because what you need to do now is take the axle out of the back of the hub. If your axle is stuck and will not slide out, being that mine slid right out fairly easily, you can come to the front here and tap it out, but what you're going to want to do is use either a rubber mallet or you can get a small piece of wood, put it in this hole on top of the axle head and tap it with a regular hammer until it breaks free a little bit, and then you can come back here. You'll see that there's a metal plate on this. You can get something in there under both that and the head of the axle itself and pry it loose very gently. You don't want to damage the axle unless you're wanting to replace that too. If you're replacing that as well, it doesn't really make a difference. You can smash it up all you want. So this guy will come out, and this is where having the wheel rotated forward comes in handy because you need to get this guy to come out around the wheel, and we're just going to set that to the side. Now we're going to need to take off our brake caliper bracket, and a lot of people who make these videos for some reason take this off before getting to the step when you can just use your impact or have more access with a ratchet to just pop these guys right off. Two 17 millimeter bolts. It's fairly easy to bust them loose with my impact. Had I been using a breaker bar, probably would have been just as easy. They're going to come out, and you're going to take that bracket off to get access to getting the rotor off. And there it goes. This is also a good time to be checking out whether or not you need to be looking into some brake pads or brake rotor if you're already going this far into do a bearing. So I'm going to leave that assembled as is because I don't have all my brake components just yet. I do need to do a brake job on this guy all the way around. While you've got this off, this is a good time to inspect your brake caliper glide bolts or slide bolts. Make sure that they've got slide, so you can pull on them and they come in and out. If they don't glide or slide, you need to replace these and or take them out, sand them down to a smooth finish, and re-grease the hole they're in. If you have any holes in these boots, you need to replace them because they are what allow the caliper to move back and forth during brake operation to not stay seized against the caliper. Make sure you don't lose your pads, your clips. If you're not doing any of that right now, just kind of set this whole assembly aside as is. Don't need to mess with it. And then we're going to come into the back of the bearing housing. You're going to see 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 14 millimeter. You're going to bust those 4 guys out. And the entire rotor assembly will come off. But at this time, if you're not sure if you can get the rotor off, as this is just a slide rotor, you're going to want to come to the rotor face. There are 2 little bolt holes. I believe they take a M12 by 1.25. I'm not sure, but what you can do is you can put some little bolts in there, tighten them down, and they will press the rotor off of the assembly, and then your rotor will come free. Or you can honestly take the bearing hub assembly out and tap this guy off with a mallet. Either's fine. Doesn't really make a big difference. So once you get that guy out, you're just going to go straight to putting your new wheel bearing system in. Put in your 4 bolts in the back, and then you're going to go and put your brake rotor back on, and then you're going to put your brake caliper bracket back on. Then you're going to get this guy ready to go back up that way. Right after you get this in, jacks will back in through the back. It's going to be easiest to put this in, get it so you can get the nut sitting on it, at least a few threads, so you can line this up easier. Get your 2 bolts up on top here, and this wouldn't be a good time to reset the alignment. What you want to do is put everything back together first, make sure everything else is tight, and then you come and you set the alignment of your camber bolt. You set it to those 2 points, hold one end with a wrench. In this case, I'm just using a ratchet because it was easier for me to grab. And then on the other side, you're going to tighten down the net while you hold this side lined up with your mark or 2 marks. And then you're going to put the wheel back on and you're all done. If you have any questions, you can message me. Again, this is the basic set out, all the tools you're going to need with the addition of any extenders or breaker bars. Always wear gloves. I highly insist on investing in some form of an impact wrench, whether it's an impact driver, smaller impact wrench, or what I've done is a DeWalt XR impact wrench rated to 700 foot-pounds of working torque, 1200 foot-pounds breakaway torque. I already have a bunch of other DeWalt tools, so this was pretty easy for me to just buy the tool only and suffice them with my batteries. It's got a 3 impact speed setting. That makes a big difference when you're doing smaller tasks versus larger ones. I've pretty much broken free every stuck nut I've ever had with this guy pretty much painlessly. It's a great investment. It makes a big deal in speeding up these projects. I'm going to supplement this purchase with a smaller impact wrench from DeWalt so I can get out those smaller ones back there. If you're thinking about possibly investing in a right angle impact wrench, I highly suggest the Milwaukee M12 right angle impact wrench. It doesn't pack a whole lot of punch, but usually when you're having to get into systems of right angle impact, they're usually smaller bolts, 12 millimeters, 10 millimeters, 8 millimeters. Pretty decent investment. It's about $150 for a setup for it, for battery charger, tool, maybe closer to $200 depending on where you're buying it. These tools make a huge difference in not having to invest so heavily in larger wrenches, more breaker bars, extenders. I mean, they're pretty much the best way to go when doing these extensive repairs. Again, if you have any questions, message me, comment. Any suggestions on other videos are more than welcome. And again, this was a 2005 Subaru Outback XT base model. If you guys want to see other videos or anything like that, send me a request. I'm happy to find vehicles to work on. I usually don't because no one's asking. Generally like to do videos about basic repairs that come up a lot more frequently for people. I work on a lot of Japanese cars, so Subarus, Hondas, Toyotas. I've got no problem working on anything else though. Fords, Dodges, Rams, anything like that. It's all pretty straightforward stuff. Yeah. See you guys on my next video.